Afternoon, evening, whatever time you're tuning in the program called What's Going On FlintTalkRadio.com. I'm George Moss, the host of the program, and since this is not the second and fourth Mondays, I do not have my co-hosts here with me, but I do have a special guest in the studio, and we're very glad to have Mr. Tom Wasser here this afternoon with us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, and Tom, we're going to be discussing an issue that I think is a concern to both of us, and that is what's going on in Washington.
Yeah, a lot's going on in Washington.
So we're going to be talking about the NSA and some of the things that are taking place in our capital. It is still our capital. I don't think they've declared it yet that it belongs just to the politicians. So we're going to be talking about some of the excesses that are taking place in our government. Let's start off, though, by reading some of the Constitution, Tom. I wanted to read, I'm going to read both the Second Amendment and the Fourth Amendment, although we're talking specifically about the Fourth Amendment. I want to read the Second Amendment also because I just want you to be aware out there in the listening audience and also in the viewership how specific the language is and how it really doesn't allow a whole lot of wiggle room. The Second Amendment in particular is very exacting, and I don't know how you can amend it without amending the Constitution. It's very specific in what it claims that it gives you the right to do. Here is the language in the Second Amendment. Let me just read that, although that will not be our topic this afternoon. I just want to read it so you'll be aware of the attack that's really being made in a more holistic way of the Bill of Rights, of which the NSA is just one part of that. The language in Amendment 2 of the Bill of Rights says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That language shall not be infringed does not say except under certain prescribed circumstances or conditions. So I think that's pretty absolute in terms of how the language reads. Let me go to the Fourth Amendment, which is more germane to what we're doing this afternoon, and that is Amendment 4. That amendment says, under the search and arrest warrants, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable, and that is the key word, unreasonable searches and seizures, shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be seized. So this is what the framers decided to put in the Constitution, the rule of law, unless it's been retracted behind our backs.
Well, and I want to bring up an interesting point. Even if we did not have the Bill of Rights, in fact, there was great debate over whether or not there was going to be Bill of Rights in the Constitution. In fact, the founders in the North didn't want a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. It was the Virginians that said that, we're not going to ratify this unless we have our Bill of Rights. So our Bill of Rights basically came from the Virginian Bill of Rights. But the founders in the North argued this, very simply, that the Constitution explained specifically what the federal government was going to do. The Constitution did not give our federal government the right to infringe on free speech. It did not give the federal government the right to infringe on our freedom to bear arms. It specifically restricted the government to a certain responsibility in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And the concern was, by the founders of the North, if we add a Bill of Rights in, that anything that's not outlined in the Bill of Rights, it'd be assumed that the government could do.
I see.
And so, but
good point.
And so, basically, the Constitution doesn't allow our federal government to infringe on our rights, or to infringe on our gun rights, or infringe on our press. It restricted the federal government to a specific role, and that role was to be a tool of the states, not the people. Mm-hmm. And when I say tools of the state, it's the states got together and they said, under this union, we need something that we can't do individually. We can't coin money individually, because if we do, one state could have paper money, the other state could have gold coins. So they decided they wanted the federal government to do these things for the states. And so, in essence, and some of the other things, part of this process is, that's why we had the senators. The senators were the representatives of the states to represent the states with the federal government and have control over the federal government. But our founding fathers realized one more thing, that if just we had senators and we had the federal government, the states and the federal government could get together and tax the people unlimited. So the checks and balances to that was Congress. That's why Congress appropriates how much money is spent and stuff. That was the people's representation to the House. So there was a great debate on the Bill of Rights, but it was the Virginians that wanted the Bill of Rights, and they were the largest state, and it was key in the safety of the United States that they ratify the Constitution. So that was our first set of amendments that came in, was the Bill of Rights, and that's how we get.
Let me stop you right there. That's a very interesting point. Are you saying that given the restraints already in the first 7 articles, that the Bill of Rights, in a sense, was non-essential?
That's correct. That is correct.
So because of Article 1, Section 8, and the 18 clauses therein that would have restrained government,
yes,
that was sufficient?
Yes.
That is a very interesting concept. Because as I look at it now, Tom, I don't see how the government would be any more restrained or out of control on the other side than it would be whether or not the Bill of Rights existed or not, since it's being violated. And it seems to me that it was enough restraints in place in the 7 articles, particularly in terms of the enumeration of powers.
Correct.
In Article 1, Section 8.
Correct. And basically, in the South, the Virginians felt so important that we need to outline these protections specifically, and that's why they wanted it in the Constitution, to give us more. So we're doubly protected. We're protected by the Constitution, which restricts the federal government, but it also in the Constitution says we want to further advise the federal government that you cannot have an impact on freedom of speech, freedom of the press, or on the Second Amendment or gun rights. So it was like a dual layer that's in place there.
I think to make it more explicit, one of the things that Ayn Rand stated in one of her books, I think it's the one called Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, and what she said in that book was that capitalism is implicit in the Constitution, it's implied. It was not made explicit. So maybe in the Bill of Rights, what they were doing there was to take that which was implicit and then continue to nail down the boards. Because I see how they were very creative in their attempts to chain down the government. This is what they seem to have been fundamentally working on. How do you restrain power?
Right. And
they did that. You would have thought that the Article 1, Section 8 would have done sufficient work in that regard.
Right, and it does. But one of the big concerns were general search warrants. The fact the British would come in and just generally search a whole town. And they'd come in with a warrant that said, hey, we're going to search the whole town, and it really didn't say for what or for what reason. It was just a general search warrant. And so that's what they put into the second part of the Fourth Amendment. It says, no warrant shall be issued but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describe the place to be searched and the person or thing to be seized.
Right.
Specific. It says that if the warrant's going to be issued, it has to be very specific. And in fact, the courts have gone so far as to say that if there isn't a warrant issued, and somebody, and let's say the police do a search without a warrant, all warrants without a search are illegal per se, meaning that you got to have the same proof to get a warrant as to do a search without a warrant.
Now, let me ask you this question. It doesn't say in the Fourth Amendment the warrant must come from a court of law. So how do you reconcile that?
Because the prescribed purpose of the warrants always came from the courts. And so
that precedent, then, you would say?
Right. The warrant comes from the court. It's a command from the court to the police officer to go see something. But the framers recognized also in the first part of the Fourth Amendment that you could do a search without a warrant. It just has to be reasonable. It cannot be unreasonable. And so the question is what's reasonable and what's unreasonable?
Okay.
And so for a police officer or the government, we've had to rely on 50 years of court precedents to determine what's reasonable and unreasonable. And one of the other things that's also key about the Fourth Amendment, it does what? It protects us from unreasonable search, general warrants, but it protects us from the government. That's it. It doesn't. Our right to privacy isn't from your neighbor; it's from the government. This is directed to the federal government, specifically to the federal government. So you have to understand, on the Fourth Amendment, you have to have a search. So what is a search? And a search is from the government. And so a couple of conditions, to what is unreasonable. As a police officer, 99% of their searches are without a warrant. They occur on the street. So most searches in the United States are done without a warrant. But when the police officer goes to court, he has to outline the probable cause and why he believed that the evidence was going to be there and what prompted his search.
That led to the search on the street.
Right. That, as a police officer, we have to define and we have to outline the probable cause for a search. And it has to be to the same level it would take to get a search warrant. Okay? One of the other key things to do in a search is the courts will authorize that warrant. Okay? And one of the things in the NSA, which is really key, is their search warrants right now are general search warrants. The NSA is doing search warrants to Verizon, all records. Unlike the Fourth Amendment, it doesn't direct you right into what they're searching for. It doesn't say the crime they're searching for. It doesn't say who they're searching or what to seize. It's just a general search warrant for all their records. And so that really violates a fundamental Fourth Amendment condition that all search warrants have to describe a particular place or person to be searched.
Now, that general warrant that is comprehensive, was that from the regular court or was that from the FISA? I wonder where that authorization will come from, because that restraint is prohibited by the Fourth Amendment. So it's really, the fact they could do that, you'd like to know then what court would have given such a sweeping.
What was interesting is it's been learned that the government went judge shopping. In essence, they went to several judges, and the judge would not want to issue the warrant. So what they did is they went from one court to one court, and every court's unique in their own way. Up in Tuscola County, where I live, I have a very restrictive court. My judges came from defense attorneys. They were defense attorneys, now they're judges, and they've been at odds with the police department most of their career, and now they're sitting there as a judge. It's hard for a police officer in Tuscola County to get a warrant. You almost have to prove your case in the warrant that it's not just a reasonable expectation that you're going to find that evidence there. You almost have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you'll find that evidence there. So certain courts are very restrictive, where other courts in the state, they'll look at a warrant and they'll go, well, this was signed off by the prosecutor, says it's okay. I'm just going to go ahead and sign this warrant. So they're less restrictive. In the case with the NSA, they went judge shopping. They looked for a judge that was going to give them what they wanted. And they went to several judges and they didn't get what they wanted. They didn't get the authorization on the search warrant, and they found a court that was a little more liberal, because each court, the judge is their own individual person, and they can be liberal or conservative, and they found a judge that authorized that warrant.
Authorized that, and that very comprehensive approach. I wonder how many of these records were in fact turned over to the government. We know one report was that there were 100 million,
correct,
which is 1/3 of the population of the country, that was under the surveillance in terms of these records being turned over that involve that number of persons. And if you have 100 million people who are posing a national security threat to this country, what that means in essence is that you cannot protect the nation, because the number of people that is in fact creating some problems to the country's security is so prohibited, the numbers are such that you just cannot restrain that many persons posing a threat. Correct. So that's just ridiculous on that face of it. But were you surprised by the NSA's behavior? Did you think that they were, before these revelations that came out, did you think that they were actually going about the business of making sure they're securing the people's rights under the Constitution and making us safe?
I assumed, and this is what's interesting. When I first started, shortly after 9/11, the Patriot Act came into place. And as a police officer, I was sent to training. And it was about 2 years after 9/11. And interesting, the Patriot Act, or the FISA Code, was only used about 400 times within the first 2 years of that bill passing. Mm-hmm. And the role of my training at that time was the integration or the command structure. If there was a big terrorist attack, that the local police could communicate with the state police, and state police could communicate with the federal government, and there was some sort of communications there. That was it. That was the role initially of the Patriot Act and what they were doing with the local police. It was, we want to communicate and we want information to flow freely. But during the Boston attack, you notice that Homeland Security was used a little differently. They were totally boots on the ground. They were going door to door with local and state police. It was one entity functioning as one. That was never the position of Homeland Security when it was first formed under the Patriot Act, under the Bush administration. In fact, also during that time, I was sent to the National Federal Academy down in Glencoe, Georgia. And at the academy, there was Homeland Security people being trained at the same time. They were older, they were heavy set, versus the other federal officers, very lean, very fit. The Homeland Security that was put into place under the Patriot Act, under the Bush administration, was designed just to do what they were doing, screening baggage at the airport, not running law enforcement boots on the ground. And then shortly after Obama took over, I noticed that when I was renting a movie, that they said, you know, pirating this movie is illegal, and a Homeland Security badge. Homeland Security has changed their original role from a very general role at the airport to now a police force integrated with our local police department.
I see.
And this is, to me, one of the other threats is this integration of local police department with our federal Homeland Security Department. What happens is you lose your autonomy, and you have one very powerful police department. If it goes wrong, it all goes wrong. If you have one police department that's going wrong, you always have the county oversight to it, or you have the state oversight, or you have the federal oversight. But if you have one police department functioning wrong, you have a problem. Just like in Boston, every one of those searches, they fundamentally went to every home, kicked in the door, violated every constitutional right of that person home, and not a word has been said about it.
What do you see as government's primary role? I know that Judge Napolitano would say on his program that he sees the primary role of government is to keep us free and not to keep us safe, although that is one of the things the government does. But its primary function is to keep us free. And he says that if they, in fact, keep us safe by not keeping us free, then they become part of the totalitarian forces they're trying to prevent from taking our rights from us. Government has done that. Correct. While claiming to be protecting us from the threat. So in terms of how you view it, Tom, how do you view the number one on the list of things government's responsibilities entail? What is the primary number one responsibility of government?
The federal government's primary responsibilities lies in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, those 18 paragraphs. That's it. For the states, designed to provide the services to the states cannot do. Now your state government is responsible for your safety and those things, but the federal government's role is designed for the general welfare of the United States, the group of states together, which means a defense to the United States, to coin money for the United States, to assure commerce moves from one state to another state without infringement. That's it. Immigration. And what's interesting is the things that the government is responsible for, they're failing. Immigration is one of them.
I see Article 1, Section 8 the same way that you do. I think that the states were very jealous of their power that they were in fact relinquishing to the federal government and the creation of the federal government, and they were just going to itemize what it is they were relinquishing from their own sovereignty. And they were saying that the federal government can do this, and they had itemized it and enumerated those powers. And I just don't think you could have even perceived back in that time period where we've come with that in 2013, where all of those restraints have been, those shackles have been broken, and now we have government running wild. Do you see? We're going to get back to this this discussion, but I wanted to kind of go sideways just for a minute and ask you: do you see the introduction of the 17th Amendment in the Constitution as being the straw, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak?
Absolutely. It basically took any control of the federal government, any control that the state had over the federal government away. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a key element to where we are today. Mm-hmm. That was the start of the government total control, or federal government control over the state. It's
a bridge we cross. So can this problem, we see the NSA being out of control and the federal government being out of control in general, and the question I always ask myself is, can this problem be fixed in terms of this behemoth we call the federal government today, without in fact reestablishing the way in which we elect senators and send them to Washington, D.C.?
It can be fixed by the states themselves, and where they need to fix it is they need to stop taking the federal tax dollar. And I see the federal tax dollars like crack cocaine. I mean, our state legislators go, hey, we're not taxing the people for this federal dollar. Mm-hmm. Let's let the federal government tax them. Let's get that federal dollars. Let's spend it in our state. Makes us look good, but it's not coming from us. We're not taxing the state people. Mm. So every time our state legislators allowed or reach out for that federal money comes in with performance obligations. And usually by laws, the state can only do so much. So the state starts becoming beholden to their dealer, the federal government, and they lost control there. Mm-hmm. And it would be hard for the state to say, we're not going to take any more of your federal dollars, therefore you're not going to have any control over us. We're going to shut that down. And what would happen is they'd literally have to cut state government down in thirds. Because that's what fuels the state, this is federal money.
I see some umbrage given the number of scandals we're dealing with right now, and I see states now like South Carolina was one of those that said they object to some of the things that are being put upon the states by the federal government. Do you see this latest scandal, and when has the government not had scandals, being such right now that we might see some systemic changes that are needed to rein the federal government back under the restraints of the Constitution?
Well, and my biggest concern is no. And the reason why is everybody thinks the NSA program is designed for safety or the security of this country, but I see the NSA as a program designed to control.
Control the American people.
Control the American people. But not only the American people, to control those within the government, to control Congress, to control Senate, to control legislators, control courts. Some interesting things happen.
Okay. That's interesting.
Recently, and one was during the Obamacare. It went to the Supreme Court, and Chief Justice John Roberts came out with a decision that was, to me, and most people who read the Constitution, way out in left field.
I read his opinion, so he was in left field.
We had a General Petraeus that was a strong general that had ideas and understanding of what took place in Benghazi, which was the death of 4 Americans, one being our ambassador. All of a sudden entered into a sex scandal where we couldn't figure out how did they get all these records. And they said, well, we had some leaks and we're trying to plug it up, and we did a search warrant. When those events happened to me, something didn't seem right. It seemed like, where did this stuff come from? Petraeus, nobody questioned, why were they looking at his records so closely? They weren't looking at his records closely. I believe they had his records, and they just said, he's a problem. If he testifies on this Benghazi, he is a problem for our administration. We need to do something. We need to go ahead and eliminate them. They basically, the federal government's, here's another question. If I'm investigating a crime, and part of that crime, I find out that there's a affair occurring with my criminal, that affair isn't something I can disclose. Okay?
Okay.
It has nothing to do with the crime I'm investigating. If I'm a federal officer and I've gotten a phone tap on somebody's phone, a legal wiretap for, let's say, organized crime boss, if I'm listening to what happens is you have to have somebody there manning the phones 24 hours a day, monitoring those phone calls. And when somebody picks up the phone call, I can monitor for so long as part of the process. And if nothing is criminal in nature, I have to hit a button and I can't listen to any more for a couple minutes. And then I can come back into the conversation and listen. If it's not criminal in nature, I have to mute it again and I can't listen to that conversation. The tap is only for criminal evidence. I cannot listen to anything that doesn't have anything to do with a crime. So that's key. With a legal wiretap, cannot monitor just all the phone calls. It has to be phone calls of illegal nature.
Because that's under the restraints of the probable cause. When you went and got the warrant,
that's correct.
Then it specifically limited you to what you said you were looking for. You can't go beyond that.
That is correct. That is specifically, and that's perfect. That is exactly what it does. It limits your ability to get this information. On the General Petraeus thing, they're leaking out information of an affair. For what purpose? It has nothing to do with their investigation.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting concept, a proposition that you just put out that I hadn't heard before, and that is that not only is the NSA's surveillance intended to control the American people, but to control those in government. And you do see that happening in that case, and in some other cases also, in terms of how they, who was doing that with the FBI in terms of those records he had on everybody. And when they were talking about dismissing him as the director of the FBI, he said went to his filing cabinet and pulled out things and said, well, do you want this exposed? And things like that. So this is just an extension of that.
Yes.
Of that kind of authoritarian control that the government has, never intended by the framers. So when this broke, these scandals broke. Well, you seem to be much more aware, Tom, than most persons I come in contact with about what the government is in fact doing. So how did this hit you when these revelations came out, these scandals, one after the other came out?
What I found interesting is they said they were limiting, they had the search warrant, but they were limiting the information they were gathering, and that they were gathering third-party information. So the records I have with my cell phone companies are my personal transactions and the transactions of the cell phone company. I don't own the cell phone company's records. They have them. That's their records. So they can do what they want with them. Now, here's another interesting thing. The Fourth Amendment protects you from the government search and seizure. Now, there's some case laws where in the past a neighbor suspects their neighbor's dealing drugs. So they go over, the door's unlocked, the neighbor goes in, uninvited, nobody's home, but he goes in anyways and he sees that there's narcotics laying about the table. He comes back to his house, he picks up the phone, calls the police and says, hey, I went over to my neighbor's house, walked in the door, and there's drugs. And the police go over there, they get a warrant, and they seize the drugs. And what happens is, the court says there's some argument there. The argument is, well, wait a minute, you seized this without a warrant. You had no probable cause. You violated the person's Fourth Amendment rights when the neighbor entered into that residence. Well, the courts have said, wait a minute, the neighbor isn't the government. Therefore, the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply. Therefore, the evidence he gathered and gave to the police is legal and can be admitted. Now, here's another scenario. The police go to the neighbor's house, and the neighbor says, hey, I think they're dealing drugs over there. And the police go, well, if you get a chance, go over there, go into the building, and see if they have the drugs. So the neighbor in the next couple days goes over and goes inside the building, and there's drugs, and comes back, sure enough, there's drugs. Well, the courts have ruled in that part that once the police told the neighbors to do that, they became an agent of the government, and that made it illegal.
I see. Yes, I can understand that.
So on this, the government's claiming, well, we're not collecting the data of individuals, we're collecting third-party data from the business. And the business can give us that information. Well, the business can give the government that information. If they're monitoring their transaction, let's say, on the internet, and they see something illegal, let's say an internet provider sees something illegal, they can voluntarily turn that over to the police. But when the government comes in and commands them to give the data, that, let's say Verizon or one of these other places, becomes an agent of the government.
Let me make sure I understand that part. If Verizon, on its own behest, decide it wants to turn records over, they can do that. But if the government requests that from them,
then Verizon or that would become an agent of the government, and I am protected. Mm-hmm. My transactions are protected. At that.
Yeah, I want to explore that because whenever government is making a request, because government is force, so it's not really a request, it's like a demand that this be handed over. So once the request is made, then you're saying that violation is taking place.
That is correct.
I see. Well, that's exactly what they did. And I was reading this morning on one of the posts that Verizon and the others that were in fact requested, quote unquote, to turn the records over, have come out now and said this is how many times that they were making these demands upon the business to turn over records and so on, which some of them said that they were reluctant to do, but then there was also this other thing about force. So this violation that has occurred, tell me if you had a breakdown in the check and balance system, how do you rein this back in?
And that's the problem, because if you notice, you got the Republican Speaker of the House coming out and saying the whistleblower in this particular incident is a traitor. And, well, is he or isn't he? And why would he be saying that? And you got Dick Cheney coming out. He's everybody's coming out and saying, and all he exposed was very simply that they're getting what the government says is this metadata, this very unintrusive search. At what point, why is that, if it's so unintrusive, why is that considered so secret and so protected and such a dangerous thing to expose? Basically, you're exposing the people to what the government's doing, which is clearly illegal.
Yeah, when I heard Boehner saying that this was in fact treason, and I looked at what was in fact being disseminated by the gentleman who told us about what the NSA was doing behind our backs, which is really basically violating the Fourth Amendment. I was asking, so where is the treasonous behavior if in fact Mr. Snowden has taken 2 oaths. One oath, of course, is to keep that which he's been made privy to secret, but he's also taken an oath to obey and uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. And the question then becomes, since there are 2 oaths in place here, which oath trumps the other oath? And I think that what they're saying is treasonous behavior. They're saying treason can be defined of that which they object to, but if he is in the purview of upholding the statutes that are the rule of law in this country, then in terms of doing that, anyone that stops him from doing that is involved in treasonous conduct.
And you're right. Here's an interesting thing. You know, if you're in the mob, anytime somebody commits if you're in a car and you pull up to a bank and the guy next to you gets out of the car and he runs in and robs the bank, gets in the car with you, and all of a sudden you go, oh my God, he just robbed the bank. Your options are, as soon as you drop him off, go to the police. If you don't go to the police, you become a co-defendant. Likewise, when the government's doing something wrong, you have an obligation to tell somebody. That's why there's laws, the whistleblower law, that protects you, that when you expose somebody violating the law, that nobody can come after you. Okay, that's what the whistleblower protects you from being the retaliation. But when in this particular case, when you have the government, where does the whistleblower go when it's from the top down, your Congress and your government doing it? There's only one place for the whistleblower to go, and that is to the press, to the people, because we are the next checks of the government. It's supposed to be the people. I don't see how you can call him a criminal when you have a government engaged in criminal behavior. He has an obligation to report it.
Yeah, Tom, I was listening to some of the earlier whistleblowers, and they asked him the question, was he doing the right thing by going to the media and, in fact, exposing what the government was doing? And the person said that they had tried these other ways of doing it in terms of going up the chain of command and getting the person that is licensed by the government to, in fact, do the oversight. And they tell you, okay, are you finished? Now get out of here.
And there was 4 of them that blew the whistle on the NSA early on, and the retaliation was they were arrested.
Mm-hmm.
The FBI came to their house, did a search warrant on their house, and they were arrested. So that was what happened to a lot of the earlier. In fact, there was 4 of them that were arrested. Mm-hmm. Literally, good people said the government's doing something wrong. They went ahead and tried to report it like they thought within the governmental structure, and the FBI came to their house, did a search warrant, and arrested them.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing about the Fourth Amendment, when the government must have shown probable cause in what they're doing in terms of seizing and searching, what the court does in order to maintain a check upon the behavior that's prohibited by the Fourth Amendment is simply to declare the information that is in fact gathered under those illegal restraints that were not followed, is to declare the information unuseful in the court because it was gathered under means that are not allowed and not prohibited by the Constitution, by the rule of law. So it's really, they can say what they want to about Snowden being a traitor, but the question is, what was he in fact doing that would be treasonous? And what I see there, and I'm willing to be given other information I've not yet been given in the press, but what I see so far is that he was trying to say that this surveillance in terms of the cover that they're keeping us safe goes way beyond what would be necessary to keep Americans safe. So that, I think that's going to be the question here if they bring him back for trial. Do you see him coming back? Do you see them being able to bring him back and want to bring him back?
I see the government actively attempting to arrest him. Mm-hmm. Then I believe the government will go wherever they can go to arrest him. Mm-hmm. And again, this is when you look at this, and I say the NSA isn't about safety; it is about control. Literally, if you have control of all the information and contacts of everybody, and you look at the Speaker of the House and you say, you know what, we've noticed on your computer that you're surfing porn, or you're doing something else that doesn't seem right. It's legal, but it doesn't seem right. You can basically unelect somebody. You could use that over their heads. You could literally control every aspect. You could control their voting record. You could control a judge. Because all people are human. There's no perfect person. If we were, we'd be God. Everybody has something that could be seen as inappropriate or not right, that you believe is secret in your own personal life, mm-hmm. that if the government had access to, could literally control everything you did and how you voted and how you would sit on the court and how you would rule. And that's what I see as a problem with the NSA program.
Well, do you see the NSA's program as having that intention? We're saying here that this was this agency is about control, and it's not just about control of the American people at large, but also those who are in government, to keep their mouths closed about what government is doing behind the people's back. So what is the? It's hard to believe that there was not some malevolent intent behind even the creation of the NSA.
Well, I mean, a tool is a tool. A gun can kill somebody, but it can also protect somebody. A gun can be used for evil, and it can be used for law enforcement. It's how you mm-hmm. use that tool. Mm-hmm. The original intent, and I don't know, and I don't know under the Bush administration. I know that in the first couple of years I had a pretty good idea of what the Patriot Act was doing because I was involved as a law enforcement officer. But where that went under the Bush administration, I had no idea. But what I do know is under the Obama administration, it's gone too far. And it could have went too far under Bush. Mm-hmm. I don't know. And I'm starting to get some new information out that it may have gone too far even under the Bush administration.
Yeah, I think so. Well, one thing about these laws that you pass, you put these things in place to deal with a real problem. there are always these unintended consequences, whether it's benign or not. You're going to have some things that were not intended by the legislation passed and the creation of these instruments that maintain the security. You're going to have some other things that go on therein. And I think that that's one part of it. I always wonder, though, is that something that was in fact intended? Because it's kind of hard to believe that you would have, for example, in the FISA courts, and this is a secret court, and you think that you can maintain secrets, and then there'll be no violation of rights when secrecy is in fact maintained.
And and a lot has to do on trying to get a search warrant. On a complex search warrant, it could take me as an investigator, it could take me 5 to 6 months to get the probable cause together and to draft up a search warrant that would be credible and factual and allow me to search a business or place. And what occurred, and when you're talking about phone taps, before that, it was extremely hard to get. You really had to work, and then it was extremely costly to do because you had to have somebody monitor 24 hours. With the revelation of 9/11, the attack on America could occur anywhere. If somebody got onto a commercial plane, could occur very fast. There was a belief under the Patriot Act they needed to set up a provision in there that if they had something that led them to believe that the attack was going to occur, that they could speed up that process so it wouldn't take them 6 or 7 months to do.
Okay.
So that was the intent of that, was just a process which could be a mini process, but you still had to support that by probable cause, but it wasn't something that would take as long as 7 or 8 months to do. But it was a little less, there was a lesser desire to find all the probable cause because there was an emergency or an exception here that we have to look at these records very quickly or something could happen. That was the intent of that. Where it went wrong somewhere.
Very wrong. Well, one thing they're saying is that we stopped, the NSA is putting out, we stopped 20 violent episodes from taking place around the world. Denmark was one place. In fact, our information prohibited some bombing that would have occurred if we had not, in fact, intervened. And so they're putting out that it has, in fact, stopped some of the violence that would have accrued otherwise. So, how do you respond to that claim? Okay, well, yeah, well, these things were going on, and it was very comprehensive, but at the same time, we did stop some of the violence that would have gone on if the surveillance had not been in place.
Well, it comes down to this. The surveillance of us, is it key to the safety of the United States? No. It's left up, the key to our safety is good, reasonable law enforcement. Where are these threats? We can identify the primary threat, Islam. Okay?
I agree with you on
Radical Islam is the primary threat.
So mosques were in fact monitored. That's another thing that came out of these hearings, is that we have not had, if you wanted to in fact have a safe haven, then have your planning go on inside the mosque, because we don't hear any Muslims complaining about they were being watched or any of that, and that's a major part of what some of this is all about.
If the NSA was about security, or is it about control? You need to look at the number 8 or number 9 on the Homeland Security threats are pro-life Christian groups. Catholics are like number 8 or number 9 on the list as being a national threat because they're pro-life. This is the problem. You have a government that it's not really concerned about the real threat. Okay? What they're concerned about are people that oppose their administration.
Yes. I find that to be, I have come to the same conclusion, but I find that to be absolutely appalling. But maybe the other part of that is that these politicians in general are looking out for their own welfare and not looking out for the welfare of the American people.
They're probably looking out for their political welfare, but what happens if they fall under the same thing I was talking about with the Chief Justice? What happens if their values have been controlled by somebody who says, we got something on you and you're going to vote our way? And it's that easy. Because what they're doing, what the NSA is doing, is it's the same thing as if the police went into everybody's house every day, gathered up everything you were doing, did a search of your house every day, just in case you might commit a crime. Just in case.
Yeah, we said 87, when I say we, the Tea Party, which I consider myself to be affiliated with, at least on the peripheral levels. I have not joined, but I go to some of the meetings and I talk to a lot of their members. And I was in the Glenn Beck rally in 2010 when they had 500,000 people in the mall. I don't care what CBS reported, talking about 87,000. I was at both the March on Washington and the Glenn Beck rally, and there were twice as many people out there in that mall on 28/2010 than it was on August 28th, 1963. And so being there, I've talked to a lot of Tea Party people, and it's really quite disconcerting to be around those kinds of people, Tom, who are very peaceful. And I mean, I was practically licked out of the mall. I was one of a few blacks over there. My point is just that to have those persons on the list that pose no threat to the country, and these groups that are absolutely involved in treasonous conduct go undetected, even undiscussed in terms of these surveillances that are taking place, is really quite a statement about something that we're not being told, whatever that is. And your statement about it being about control more so than anything else is quite an interesting statement to me, because I do not think it has to do with keeping us safe when you have those groups not making us safe, it's making us not safe, being left undeterred.
And the targets, again, are those people that oppose the current administration's agenda. Not any, they every time there's a shooting, they want to look at, and again, I don't believe Tea Party people are right-wing extremists. They're far from right-wing extremists.
I talked to too many of them to believe that. I know what you're saying there is true.
They're constitutionalists. They believe in the law. They believe that everybody has rights and everybody has privileges of freedom and liberty. They're not extreme. They believe the government has gone to the extreme left. And the liberal movement was basically taken over by the progressives. And the progressives are from the Frankfurt Institute that said, hey, communists sound bad. We don't want to, we use the word communist, it sounds bad. Let's use the term progressive. Barack Obama is a progressive. Hillary Clinton is a progressive.
That's true.
Bill Clinton.
Yeah, that is something that I think we need to look at in terms of looking underneath the surface to find out what is going on that we're not being told. And we have to be very vigilant in our citizenship, ferreting out what our government is in fact doing so we can hold the government accountable. And that, of course, means you have to have the information in order to do that. And that's why I'm kind of ambivalent until I get some other information about Snowden. I think that is within the constitutional purview. You have to know what your government is in fact doing. Otherwise, how can you have the accountability that was intended by the framers in terms of making sure government is doing that which in fact is legal, and also that which benefits the people it's supposed to be serving in a Republican form of government.
And Snowden actually came out and said, we're doing something else too. We're actually monitoring, Skype conversations and emails back and forth, and they were talking about monitoring video conferences between militaries out in the field and their wives. It has nothing to do with Homeland Security at that point. It has everything to do with gathering information on people. And every totalitarian government needs information to deal with people.
Well, now, do you say then that given the excesses of the NSA, do you think it can be reformed?
It can be reformed if the people basically reform it. The people are going to have to say to their state representative, or your federal representative, you're not going to get elected. And then the states need to step up to the plate and start asserting their rights, and simply say, this is not only is a violation of the federal constitution, it's also a violation of our state constitution.
We do have a caller if you want to take a call.
Sure, most certainly.
Okay, hold on here. We'll switch over. Okay.
the call can go ahead. We're very happy that you called, and thank you for calling Flint Talk Radio Studio. And if you have a question, we have a guest here, Mr. Tom Wasser, and be very glad to have you to ask a question.
I appreciate it.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Regarding progressives, I'd like to put another label on them, if I may, and I'd like to call them thieves. Because what's happening is they, in taking over, I'm sorry?
Go ahead, sir.
Okay, in taking over our public school systems, what they've accomplished is training up an entire generation of voters who can vote themselves a living. So they hire a politician to go and steal from another citizen so that they may gain some sort of benefit from this. So the progressives are thieves, and I think this is a movement of social elitists who want to come in and steal the wealth of the American people, as in most feudalistic societies that have been in existence since the beginning of time. Mm-hmm. And our system of government allowed man to keep the fruit of his labor. And all these people are just thieves, and they use any type of crisis to take our freedoms away from us. Mm-hmm. And that's what I want to interject into this conversation.
I'm very glad you called, and I will tell you that I don't have any objection to that analysis. I'm going to ask Tom to comment upon that, but I certainly have come to the same conclusion as you have as far as what we do with these politicians. We hire them to take other people's earnings and give it to someone who it does not belong to. Let me ask Tom to comment upon that statement you made.
And you make an interesting point. I see 5 major things going on right now that are a threat to the republic, as we see it, our constitutional freedoms and rights. And the first one is the NSA program is the biggest threat. The next one is the immigration bill. The third is the Common Core educational program. So you're right. They've already attacked our educational system. It's here in Michigan. Common Core is here in Michigan, and people don't realize that Common Core was founded, and the architect behind that is William Ayers, the progressive communist Weatherman Underground that bombed our Pentagon in the 60s. He is the guy behind that, and they have control of our education system right now.
I will echo that. I'm at the university, and I will tell you that I am amazed. I taught 39 years in the public school system. I went down to one of the universities after I had completed my public school educational career. And I was quite amazed when I went down there to sit in the offices and then have the discourse by being on campus on a full-time basis of the kinds of conversations that we were having in that particular place. And I can tell you that these are not and I'm looking at it in a much wider lens. These are not American institutions. These are foreign institutions on American soil, paid for by American taxpayers, and they are not beholden to the things that you and I think about when we think about being American citizens. We are beholden to the rule of law, the Constitution, and things of that sort. These persons, I think of themselves as more or less as far. They don't see themselves as foreign agents, but that's pretty much the role that they're playing in terms of not being beholden to the things that we stand for as a republic. And it's really quite an interesting thing in terms of how it plays out. So I'm going back to your statement, though, about the fact that we have our government leaders pretty much hired to take the wealth of others, and that they're thieves. I could not argue with that premise at all. That's exactly what I see going on.
And if you take away the wealth of the people, the people have to be beholden to the government too. I mean, eventually everybody has to turn to the government. And that's the society that they really want. They don't want individual capitalist hiring people, building up wealth. In fact, they attack those people that do so.
Let me ask, in that whole frame of that conversation about the government and so on, I want to ask Tom, our guest this afternoon, to how far down the road have we come on a scale of 1 to 10 of getting from underneath the Constitution so specifically and dramatically that it's going to be difficult to put the genie back in the bottle? How far down, on a scale of 1 to 10, how far down that road would you say we've come at this point?
We're at the point. We are at the point. Again, I said there were 5 things. After Common Core education, the health care bill is one of those big bills that will, You already have doctors.
1/6 of the economy.
Yes. And then the next thing is the arm of the federal government, and that will be the integration of federal, state, and local police officers into Homeland Security. Part of their training right now is that, again, Catholics are a national threat, and pro-life people are a national threat to the government. This is what's being taught to our police departments right now with this integration of Homeland Security, federal, state, and local police officers.
What's being taught?
That Catholics are a threat to the national. In fact, on the Homeland Security document, they outline it as pro-life Christians as a threat to national security.
Yes, you know, the caller said that he sees the progressives as thieves that are hired to take money from others and give it to those who it doesn't belong. You know, if the person on the street pulls a gun out and takes your money and redistributes it from your pocket to his pocket, he's distributing the wealth, and he's taking your money and then it becomes his money. And he goes to jail if he's caught doing that on the street. But if the politicians are in fact doing the same thing, and that is what they're doing, they are redistributing income that's earned by one producer of the wealth that he has in fact put in his own pocket. He made it and that's his. They're confiscating private property and making it public property and distributing it in the names of the government and then politicians are running for office. So that is I can't forego your characterization, caller. Your characterization is exactly as I see it, at least. And I heard President Obama talking to Joe DePlummer, and I could not believe what was coming out of his mouth when he's running as a candidate, and that made my eyebrows go up in terms of it's the neighborly thing to do, to take your money and give it to somebody who it doesn't belong to, and that's neighborly. I hope I don't have neighbors like that in terms of getting involved in coming next door and taking stuff out of my house and distributing it because they feel I got too much furniture.
I think we all deserve a few $1,000s off of Obama's personal account. Then,
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that was quite.
He's not going to go along with that.
Yeah, that made me really begin to see who was running here. Bill Ayers light. Tom, that's interesting what you said earlier about Bill Ayers. You're saying Bill Ayers is in back of some of the progressive things that are going on in public education.
Yeah, the Common Core program that the state of Michigan, the Department of Education accepted and put into place without our legislators is a progressive program, and it's a program designed by William Ayers. And then this program went into a nonprofit. They set up a nonprofit. The first year of the nonprofit, they had over $65 million to put this Common Core into place. And they basically have put it into place here in Michigan. But it has nothing to do with education. In fact, it says in the opening line, it's a transformational type process, not an education process. It's something to transform the country. And that's exactly what Common Core is.
Well, now, we're talking about the NSA, but in terms of this other scandal, the IRS, can that organization be reined in? It has 90,000 members in it. Or do we need to move to a flat tax and just simply get away from having this behemoth organization that is the oversight agency that's going to, in fact, demand that you do X, Y, and Z and can target his enemies and things of that sort? Do you need to get rid of it in order to reform it?
Yes.
Can I be?
I don't think it could be reformed if our Congress stepped up to the plate and says we're going to impeach the head of the IRS. We're going to remove him from office. Remember, the Congress can impeach Holder. The Congress can impeach the head of the IRS
on Article 2, Section 4.
Yeah, but they're not going to do that.
They're not going to do it because of why would they not do it?
Be a good question, because they haven't impeached anybody. And it's got to be affirmed by the Senate, so the Senate probably wouldn't go along with it anyway. So the Congress could impeach, but it won't be affirmed by the Senate.
Yes. Okay. Well, we have enjoyed I definitely have enjoyed the conversation, Tom. Hope you'll come back real soon. We have to continue this discussion later down the road because I don't think these problems are going to go away anytime soon. Want to thank you for tuning in this afternoon at flinttalkradio.com. I'm George Moss, again, hosting a program called What's Going On, and we're very glad to have with us this afternoon our guest, Tom Wasser, and I'm sure you've enjoyed his comments as I have, and hope to have you tune in next week. Until that time, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.